Hello everyone, this is Balaji from Rushi Technologies. In today's session, we'll try to understand more about the AWS services. So when we are working for any applications or a projects, you are trying to leverage or use services from AWS Cloud. So AWS is a cloud service provider. They are offering so many cloud services, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software also as a services. And when we are working with AWS, we are going to create an account in AWS for our applications or a project. And using that account, we are going to create and manage the services. Security play a vital role in any application. So we have to secure the applications deployed in AWS. We have to secure the data that is being stored in AWS. We need to secure the services that is used in AWS also. We have so many security standards that we need to follow. Suppose you have to secure the data that is stored in AWS, data security, you can use encryption in transit, encryption in rest. Using SSL and TLS certificates, we can secure the data that is being transferred from one instance to another instance. And whatever data that is being stored in the disk storages, you can encrypt the data in transit using KMS. And also network security, you can create your own networking in AWS using VPC, and you can control the access to the network and instances in that network using routes, network access control list, security groups. And the most importantly, we need to secure our AWS services like EC2, EBS, EFS, S3. Multiple team members or multiple users will access the AWS account. We have a application team, we have a development team, basically the application team or a development team, we have a database team, we have a DevOps team. Various users will access the AWS account and services based on the role and responsibility of the team. We need to control the access to the AWS services. This is where we have a IAM, Identity and Access Management. So using IAM, we can control access to the AWS resources. Using IAM, we can define how authentication can happen and how the authorization can happen. So we can control access to the AWS resources using IAM. We will deep dive into IAM concepts. We have so many components within IAM. We have a IAM policies. There is a user defined policy and AWS managed policies. And we have a concept of IAM users, IAM groups, IAM roles, and we can integrate AWS with an IDP, Identity Center for authentication. So we will deep dive how to create our own policy, how to create a users, how to create a groups, how we can grant permissions. We'll try to understand in a detailed way now. Now we'll try to discuss one more important service called IAM. IAM. IAM stands for Identity and Access Management. Identity and Access Management. So, what is the use of this IAM? Right. So, how this IAM works? So, this IAM is all about access to the AWS resources or AWS services. So, we have an AWS account and we will have access to the AWS account, and within that AWS account who can do what, that is we can control using IAM. So first of all, let me tell you something. Now everyone has their own AWS account. Since we are learning or exploring AWS, everyone has their own AWS account. Like you also have your own AWS account. I have my own AWS account. Harish has his own account. Kalyan has his own account. Like Sibi also has his own account. Like everyone has their own AWS account, and they are creating and managing the required resources, infrastructure resources like servers, storages, networks, load balancers, and others for deploying and managing their applications or softwares. But when everyone has their own account and everyone is logging to their account, everyone is accessing the services in that account using root credentials, root user. Since we are learning, everyone has their own account. But when we are working for any applications, when we are working for any applications or any projects, right, you join any company, and any application or any project,
If they are using AWS or Azure or GCP, whatever cloud, if they are using Azure or AWS or GCP, whatever cloud they are using, it is not like every developer or every DevOps guy, every database admin, every network admin, it is not like they will have their own accounts. So everyone will be having access to the same account. There will be one AWS account created by the manager or senior manager. Let's say every project, let's say you are working for some application or a project, at a project level or maybe at a client level. Client means for which company, for which organization you are using, working. So every, at a project level or maybe account level, account means that client level, there will be AWS account. So everyone will get access to the same AWS account, and everyone will be creating and managing required infrastructure resources for that application in that account only. But again, does everyone will have full permissions in that account? Like anyone can create whatever they wanted to create, anyone can delete the servers? Do you think anyone can create, delete servers, storages, networks, load balancers, databases like that? No. So not everyone will be giving root credentials. The root credentials we are not going to share with everyone. Root credentials we are not going to use for day to day activities. Again, root credentials are not used for day to day activities. So the root credentials are not used for recommended to use for day to day activities. So whenever any AWS account is created, we will be having only one type of user, that is root user. The root user will have a full permissions in that account. That who is that root user? Suppose if you are logging into the AWS, if you are logging into the AWS using, if you are logging into the AWS using the email ID and password that you have used when you are creating an AWS account, that is called as a root user. So initially, whenever any application or any project or any company decided they wanted to go with the cloud service providers for servers, storages, networks, like that. So at a project level or account level, the senior architect, the senior architect or manager, they will create one AWS account. They will only have the root credentials, root users, root credentials. That root credentials also, it is not recommended to be used for, it is not recommended to be used for day-to-day activities. So the root user is only used for some special task only. It is not recommended to use for day-to-day activities. Using root user, you can create an admin users. First, once you create an AWS account using root user, you create an admin users, you create some users and you make those guys as an admins, and admins will have access, full access. Again, that admins will again manage access to the normal users, normal people, using IAM. So IAM is all about authentication and authorization. This IAM is all about authentication and authorization. So authentication first, then authorization next. So authentication is the process. Authentication is the process of verifying the user's identity, whether he is a valid user or not. So authentication is the process of verifying a user identity, whether the user is a valid user or not, whether that user exists, whether the user is known to the application or whether that user is known to the system or not. So there are different types of authentication. Before any users will access that resources, before any users access the resources, that authentication will happen. So there are different types of authentication, like username and password based authentication, basic authentication, that is username and passwords, or a token based authentication. and certificate based authentication, X509 certificate based authentication. There are different type of authentication. You have to authenticate your identity. You have to authenticate your identity before you can access any resources. This is general authentication concept. Even though authentication is successful, if that user don't have a permissions, authorization comes after authentication. So after user is authenticated, the authorization comes into the picture. So authorization is the process of determining what that users can do, whether that users can do creating, updating, deleting something, or whether that user can only get something like that. So determines, this authorization is the process of determining what permissions or what that user can access. So this authentication happens after, sorry, this authorization happens after authentication. So we are going to grant some kind of a permissions based on the user's role. Based on the user role, we are going to grant some kind of a permission. So authentication and authorization are implemented together. They are key components of identity and access management. So here, whether you take GitHub, whether you take Jenkins, whether you take SonarCube, whether you take Nexus, whether you take databases, whether you take AWS, Azure, GCP, or any typical application or a software, everywhere we have a authentication and authorization. If authentication itself is failed, if the authentication itself is failed, there is no authorization comes, right? If authentication is successful, then it is going to verify whether that authenticated user has access or not. So in AWS also, in AWS, in order to access AWS resources, in order to manage AWS resources, we have to authenticate, and we should also have a permissions. So AWS also supports different types of authentication. There is a different types of authentication. AWS also can supports different type of authentication. So first of all, let's try to identify what type of users you have in AWS. We will identify. Sometimes you may see HTTP status codes, guys, 401, 403. Sometimes your request may fail with 401. So 401 unauthorized, which means the authentication itself is failed. That user is a not valid user. That credentials might be wrong. Maybe that user doesn't exist in the system or application. Or 403 means forbidden, access denied, forbidden. The authentication is successful, but he don't have a permissions for that resource what he is trying to access or manage. So this authentication and authorization is very, very important. In AWS also, whenever we are accessing AWS services or resources as an AWS users, as an AWS user like a developer, DevOps guy, or any application or a system, also we have to authenticate, and if we have a permissions, then only we can create or manage or access AWS resources. In AWS, we have a different types of users. AWS users. We have different types like root user, IAM user, identity center user, like that. So how you log in AWS is depends on what type of user you are. So how you log in to the AWS depends on what type of AWS you are. You can manage AWS account as a root user. We can manage AWS account as a root user. You can manage AWS account as a root user, or you can IAM user, or identity center, as an IAM identity center, or federated identity, like that. So we have root user, we have IAM user. We can integrate IAM, AWS IAM with the identity centers, like a central identity providers for authentication. Identity center user, like LDAP or Azure Active Directory. And federated identity. Federated identity means already it is identity. Identities are done via some Google, and via Google you can integrate other like that. So identity. So here we have a different types of users. So the root user. So what is the root user? So root user is also known as a account owner. Account owner. Root user also known as a account owner, who created an account. Who created an account. So root user also known as account user. You have complete access to all AWS services and resources in your account as a root user. When you first create an AWS account, when you first create an AWS account, you will begin with only one identity, single identity that has complete access to all AWS resources and services in that account. So that identity is called as a root user, account root user. If you are login to the AWS account using the email address and password that you used to create an account, then you are a root user. And again, it is very very important that you should not use a root user for day to day activities. You should not use a root user for day to day activities. You should not use this root user for day to day activities. We have a different users. So you have a root user, IAM user, identity center user, like that. So first of all, the root user is not recommended for day to day activities. So when you create an account, you will begin with only one identity that has a complete access to all AWS services and resources in the account. That is called as a root user. So if you are accessing AWS, if you are logging to the AWS using the email ID and password that anyone is used for creating that AWS account, then you are a root user. But again, you have to safeguard. You have to safeguard your root credentials, and you have to use root credentials for performing only specific task that only root user can do. So for day-to-day activities, it is not recommended to use root user. So whenever you create any AWS account, let's say, so you created an AWS account, you will begin with only one user. There is only one user, that is a root user. That is a root user. Root user means the one who created AWS account. Let's say you will begin with only one user. This is a root user. Let's say this is root user. Root user means the one who created the AWS account. We will begin with only one user. So let's say only one user, root user, the one who created an AWS account. But this root user is not recommended for day-to-day activities in AWS. What do you mean by day-to-day activities? What we are going to do? Suppose you are a DevOps guy working on AWS. So what is your day-to-day activities? Anyone? Day-to-day activities means you have to create a required day-to-day activities in AWS. Day-to-day activities in AWS. You should not use root user for day-to-day activities in AWS. What is your day-to-day activities? Like suppose you are creating a servers. You have to create a servers. You have to create a servers or maybe storages, maybe networks. You may need to create a VPCs, subnets, route tables, and security groups. You may need to create a servers, EC2 instances, and you may need to create some storage and attach the storage to that servers. You may need to create a load balancers. You may need to create a target groups. You may need to create an RDS clusters, and you may need to create and grant permissions also to the some new persons joined that application or project. This is day-to-day activities in AWS. Suppose you are working on AWS based on the requirement for your application team. Suppose there is some application team, they wanted to use AWS for deploying their application, storing the data, all these things. So here they will they will come to the AWS infrastructure team, or infrastructure team is also DevOps team only. Suppose if you are working on infrastructure, right, they will come and request, I wanted to use this so and so AWS services for so and so requirement, can you please create? So that is your day-to-day activities, like creating a networking VPC, subnets, route tables, NAT gateways, creating a security group, that is firewalls, creating an EC2 instances with required storage, and creating a required storages and attaching that storages and mounting the storages to the servers, and creating a required S3 buckets, and creating a bucket policies, and creating a load balancers, RDS, EKS, ECR, so and so. So this is your day-to-day activities. Like not every day will do every time, every day you are not going to create a servers, but based on the requirement you may need to create a servers, update the servers, update the subnets, routes, firewalls, all these things. So this is our day-to-day activity in AWS. So it is not recommended to use this root user. It is not recommended to use this root user for performing a day-to-day activities. You have to safeguard this root user for a specific actions that only root user can do. Only root user can do something. So you have to do that one. So what task that requires root user credentials? Let's say here. So what they're telling, we recommend that you create an admin user. We recommend that we create an admin user in AWS Identity Center to perform daily tasks and access AWS resources. However, you can perform the task that is listed below only when you sign in as a root user. So what task? Suppose you wanted to close AWS account. You wanted to close AWS account, only root user can do, admin users cannot do that. And also you wanted to change your account level settings, like your account name, email address of our account, and root access keys and secret keys, and also other account level settings like contact information, payment currency preference, and AWS regions, all those things root user only can do. And again you wanted to close AWS account, you can, root user only can do. And suppose as a root user you made some guys as an admin users. Suppose as a root user you configured some users, you gave admin permissions to some users. If the admins, if the administrators accidentally if the administrators accidentally revoked their own permissions, as a root user you grant admin permissions to some people, but that admins accidentally revoked their own permissions, again root user only can again make them admins if the admins accidentally revoked their own permissions. So this is only root user. So first, when you create an account, you will begin with only one user, that is a root user. So it is recommended as a root user first you configure an admin users. Suppose you can integrate this AWS account with central identity providers also, guys, like LDAP, Azure Active Directory. So identity center users, you can integrate this AWS also for identity. You can do with the identity providers like LDAP, Azure Active Directory, like that. Otherwise, within AWS also you can create a users, IAM users. Here, don't get confused. Users are not end users. End users will not get access. Here, AWS users means the users means the represents individuals or applications need access to the AWS resources. Here, AWS users are nothing but it is going to represent individual persons or sometimes applications also need access to the AWS resources. That is users like developer, DevOps, guy, tester, admin. Sometimes your application, suppose maybe you are deploying Jenkins. Jenkins internally requires access to the AWS resources. Or Terraform you are using. Terraform internally requires access to the AWS. Or maybe some other application you are deploying, that application require access. That is also called as a user. Users are nothing but it is going to represent the individual persons like developers, DevOps guys, network admins, database admins, or applications who need access. So here you can integrate this AWS account with identity center, external identity center for authentication. Otherwise, within AWS also you can create a users, the way you guys are done in Jenkins also. Yeah, whether you take Jenkins, whether you take Nexus, whether you take SonarQube, whether you take GitHub, everywhere you have a authentication and authorization. So the way you guys created a users within Jenkins and given access to the Jenkins resources for those Jenkins users. Similarly, we can have a users, AWS users, and you can grant access to that AWS users. Here, as a root user, first as a root user, he can configure admin users. So he can integrate with some kind of a identity center. There is something called IDP, identity provider, IDP IDP, IDP. So identity provider in the context of authentication. So identity provider is also one type of a system, that will manage and verify the user identities. We are going to use a central identity provider, central IDP. All your applications, all your systems are integrated with that central identity provider, so that any system or any application will contact that central identity provider for authentication, whether that user exists and whether he is a valid user or not, like LDAP, Azure Active Directory, like that. So even your Jenkins also can be integrated with the identity provider who manages and verifies the user identities. Central again, not like every tool will contacting its own identity provider, central identity provider. Like Jenkins also can be integrated with central identity providers like LDAP, Azure Active Directory, Nexus, SonarQube, your GitHub, or any other AWS or Azure, like that also. Let's say you have a one identity provider, let's say IDP. Every organization, every company will have its own identity provider, guys. Suppose that can be LDAP or Azure Active Directory, that can be a LDAP or Azure Active Directory. Let's say that is also one system. Identity provider is also one type of system. Where user identities exist. Identity provider. So that is also one type of system where the user identities will exist. That is also one type of system or a database. That is also one type of system or a database, identity provider. Okay. Maybe let me take some diagram. Fine. Let's say this is one system or a service. One system or a service, it will manage user identities. It will manage and verifies the user identities. Like example, LDAP or Azure Active Directory. Let's say this is your LDAP or Azure AD Active Directory or any other identity provider where user identities exist. Now, this tool, this AWS also, this AWS account also can be integrated with this identity provider. So that whenever anyone is trying to access AWS, we are giving username and passwords, right? So this AWS will contact this identity provider to verify that user identity, whether that user exists or not, whether the credentials are correct or not, like that. So suppose when you join any new company, when you join any new company or a new project, right? Not new project. Let's say when you are joining any new organization, new company, on first day, on your onboarding day, what they will do? They will give induction, introduction or induction we call it. So, so this is the company. This is CEO. This is so and so. This we have these departments: finance department, HR department, IT department, and if you have any issues with your pay scale, you can contact this team. If you have any issues with your insurance and benefits, you can contact this team. If you have any assistance required for transportation, you contact this team. And he is your like finally they will introduce, like they will share the details. So like he is your manager, he or she is your manager, go and report to that manager tomorrow. All these inductions will happen, policies they will explain. And I finally, one before that induction day, they will create your identity. They will create your identity or a profile in that company or data. They will create your identity or a profile in that organization, in that organization systems, like a LDAP or Azure Active Directory. They will create an identity or a profile for you in that organization's identity centers, like LDAP or Azure Active Directory, like a database. They will give one username, they will give one default password, they will give one mail ID, right? So they will give one username, one password, one mail ID. So you can use that username and password for accessing all internal applications also. And if your that is your identity. And again, the moment they give some kind of a username password, you can access only limited application. But till you have not assigned to any project, you may not able to access any other application or a project's related resources. Let's say once you join, once you join any project within that organization, they will what they will do, the manager will ask you, can you raise a ticket to add can you raise a ticket to add yourself to these groups? There is something called group, right? So the groups are already having some permissions, right? They will say, can you raise a ticket and mention you want, add your profile or your identity to all these groups, like that. If that groups already have a permissions, then you are also going to get access to all those resources. So similarly here, as a root user, first thing, he will integrate with identity center. In this identity center, you already have a users like Balaji, Vishal, Harish, who is already working in that company. So this after integration, he can made some guys like he can made me Balaji also as an admin. In this identity center, we have a users like Balaji, Vishal, Harish. In that company, whoever is working, they will have an identity here, profile or identity. So once this root user integrates this with account with LDAP, then for this Balaji or like Vishal or Harish, he can attach admin permissions, he can attach admin policies or admin permissions, so that Balaji becomes admin. And Balaji also can log into the AWS account, and based on the policies or permissions attached to the Balaji. Now Balaji is also part of the AWS, because Balaji is a part of the LDAP. And this AWS account is integrated with the LDAP. So authentication will happen, but permissions only based on the permissions assigned by this root user to that Balaji, he will become an admin or normal user. But authentication, any tool can be integrated with central identity provider. Let's say you are using Jenkins. Jenkins also can contact the LDAP or Azure Active Directory for authentication, or you are using Nexus, JFrog, or SonarQube, GitHub. All these tools can be integrated with an identity central identity provider or external identity provider. All these tools will contact them for authentication, but permissions is defined within this tool, within this software. The permissions are defined. Similarly, AWS also can be integrated with the central identity provider for authentication, but permissions are going to define in AWS only for that users, external users or identity center user also. So here we have a users. One is root user, other type of users are identity center users. Otherwise, within AWS also you can create a user. Within AWS also you can create a user, that is IAM user. There is something called IAM user. So IAM users means within AWS also you can create a user. These are IAM identity center user. IAM identity center, because we integrated AWS IAM also with identity center. These users are called as IAM identity center users. In real time, every organization will have LDAP. But here, instead of creating so many users, also problem. In every tool, if you are creating a users, also problem. And again, if you are creating users in every tool separately, then for accessing every tool or every software, you should have a different usernames and passwords you may use. That is not correct way. You are going to use the same credentials. You are going to use the same credentials for authentication. You are going to use same credentials. Permissions is based on what permissions they have defined for that users in that tool or that softwares. Based on that they will have access. So here, identity center, IAM, root. So IAM users are nothing but, if you are creating a users within AWS, so IAM user is an entity that we will create within AWS. So this user's identity within your AWS account, and that we again, for this user also you can give permissions. Your IAM user credentials consists of name and password used to log into the AWS account. And most of the cases we are going to use identity center. So an IAM identity center user is a member of your AWS organization that can be granted access to the multiple accounts or multiple applications also here. So integrated with active directory or any other identity provider with identity center. So users in identity centers can use their corporate credentials. Corporate means whatever username and password your company has given for you, you can use those credentials to access this if you are identity center user. So most of the time, the root user will integrate with some identity center like LDAP and Azure Active Directory, so that AWS can contact this identity center for verifying the user's identity. If in this identity center, if that user exists and if in the given username and password is correct, authentication becomes successful. But this root user has to assign permissions. Here we have something called policies, IAM policies. Here we have something called policy. The way we have a bucket policy, here we have a IAM policy. So IAM policies. So here we have a IAM policies. So here we have some kind of a policies, permissions, policies like a permissions. So here we have different policy, administrator policy, like that. There is something called administrator policy. Suppose this root user assigned this policy to some person like Balaji, then Balaji, if this policy is attached to the people like Balaji, Balaji becomes an admin. That is what first he will do. That is what first will do. But as of now I don't have this central identity. I don't have any LDAP or Azure Active Directory. Anyhow, we are not going to discuss this. So within AWS itself I will create one user. Within AWS itself I will create one user, that IAM user. Then I will attach admin permissions to this IAM user, so that this guy will become an admin. Then this admin can again create and manage normal, manage access to the other people. But here there is something called groups. Suppose you have hundreds of users, thousands of users. Suppose here you have hundreds of users, thousands of users. Is it easy for you to manage permissions at user level? Suppose you have hundreds of people, thousands of people working for that company, for that application. Is it easy to manage the permissions at the individual user level again? No. Here there is a concept called groups. You can create a group. You can create a group. You can attach the permissions. You can attach the permissions to the groups. You can attach the policies at a user level, or you can attach the policies at a group level, and you can add multiple users to the group. So based on the policies attached to the group, all the users in that group will have a same access. Like you can create a group like admin group, development group, testing group, right? DevOps group, like DevOps team, development team, testing team. So you can create a groups and you can add the policies to that group. You can attach the policies to that group. So there is something called groups also here. IAM group, IAM group, group, like a group of persons, groups, like a where you are having a multiple people group. You can create a group. Let's say you can create a group. Let's say you can create a group like a development group, and you can add users to the group. You can add users to the group, like let's say there are so many users. That users can be IAM users, that users are can be federated, that identity center users also. The users can be IAM users, or you can add these the users who are there in your identity center also. You can add, like you can add users to the group. You can add multiple users to this group. You can add multiple users to this group. And you can attach the policies. You can attach the policies to the group also directly. That IAM policies you can attach. So I am attaching administrator policy. Let's say I am attaching administrator policy to this group. Let's say admin group. I am attaching administrator policy to this group. Then if I am adding the users, IAM users also I can add to this group, or I can add users from identity center also. Let's say I have added Balaji also to this group. I have added this Balaji also to this group, like that. Now, suppose in this group, this is group, admin group. You have added the users to the group. You can add or remove also. You can add or remove users. Users to you can add and remove. You can add or remove from. You can add and remove users to group. Then you can attach or attach and detach policies. So based on the policies you have attached to the group, the users who is part of that group will get access. It is very easy, right? Instead of managing permissions at a individual user level, instead of attaching policy to this user, removing, like that, you can attach policies to the group. Let's say this is group, and you can add and remove the users to the group. Suppose if anyone newly joined, you no need to grant permissions to that user directly. You just ask that user to create a ticket. You just ask that users to create a ticket, saying that I am newly joined. I need access to these so and so resources. Can you please add me to this group, like that? Group name if they mention in the ticket, who already has a permissions, they can work on that ticket, and they can add that users to this group. If anyone is moving out of the project, if anyone is moving out of the project, we can remove that user from that group, so that he will lose access to all the resources, like that. So group level, you can attach the permissions, so that we can integrate with IAM user. We can add IAM identity center users also. You can add or remove these users also to the group. So here we have a users, we have a groups, we have a policies. This policies is nothing but a permissions to the AWS resources, specific permissions to the AWS resources. So let me show that here. First, when you create an AWS account, you will begin with only root user, but still everyone is trying to manage, everyone is trying to log into the AWS using root user only, and everyone is creating resources via root user. But in real time, do you think your architect or a manager will share this root username and password to you when you are working for any application or a project? No. So they will integrate with the identity center, or they will create a IAM user, and you have to log into that AWS using your credentials. And if you have a permissions to the AWS, then only you can create, update, delete anything. For now, let's say as a root user, I am login. Let's say I am an architect or I am a manager. I created an AWS account. I have a root credentials. I am logging to this AWS using root credentials. Let's say, let's log in. Now, as a root user, it is not recommended to create and manage resources like servers, load balancers. So let's go to IAM. Let's go to IAM. Manage access to the AWS resources. Here we have a groups, users, roles, policies like that. And you can integrate your AWS account with Identity Center, external Identity Center. Let me go to IAM. Here you can see some options. You can see some options like users, groups, roles, policies, identity center. If required, you can integrate with the identity center also. If required, you can integrate with your identity center. Identity center means you have LDAP or Azure Active Directory, that is outside of AWS also, right? You can integrate your identity center with AWS also. But for now, I don't have any identity center to integrate. We will discuss this concept with the IAM user. Once you integrate identity center, once you integrate identity center, right? The users in identity center also you can see here. Users in identity center also you can see here. So here there is an option called identity provider. I don't have any identity provider. If I have identity provider, I can integrate with the OpenID Connect or SAML protocol or OpenID Connect like that. But I don't have any identity center. So what I will do, within AWS itself, I'll create a users. Once you integrate identity center, you can see those users in AWS also. You can add those users to the groups. As of now, I don't have any groups. As of now, I don't have any users, only root. And I don't have any identity center to integrate. If integrated, the users in the identity center also we can see here, and we can add those users to the groups, and you can attach the policies to that group like that. For now, let me create a users. Let me show you something called policies. Already there are so many policies are available. Here we have these types: AWS managed policy, customer managed policy, IAM policies, IAM policies. Here we have again AWS managed policy. AWS itself is already created so many policies for common use cases. If required, you can create your own policies also. That is customer managed policy. As per your requirement, you can create your own IAM policies to manage access to any specific resource or specific service. So IAM policies are nothing but permissions. It is defined in a JSON format again. The way the way we have created a bucket policies, right? Similarly, policy, this IAM policy, basically it is defined in a JSON documents that defines permissions, specifying which actions are allowed or denied on which resources. These IAM policies are defined in a JSON format, defined in a JSON documents or a JSON format, right? That is going to define, basically it is defined in a JSON format, JSON documents that define permissions, that defines permissions, permissions like actions, what actions, permissions that defines which permissions are actions, which permissions are basically actions are allowed or denied, allowed or denied on which resources. Here AWS resources means like EC2, EC2 also a resource, or EBS, EFS, S3, RDS, ELB, VPC, like everything is a resource in AWS, resource or a service. So using this IAM policy, that is JSON document, in which you can define which permissions you are allowed or denied on which resources. We already have a lot of policies here. AWS managed policies, there are hundreds of policies pre-created by AWS. You can see there is one policy called EC2 read only. Let me type EC2 read only. EC2 read only access, this is already one policy. Provide a read only access to the EC2. Let me expand this. Here also you can see same version, statement, effect, action, resource. If you see effect is allow, action EC2 colon describe, elastic load balancing describe, CloudWatch describe, auto scaling describe, resources star. For all EC2 instances, describe permissions only. For all auto scaling groups, load balancers also describe. Suppose if I am attaching this policy to the user like maybe Balaji, so Balaji will get access to the EC2 instances, load balancers, auto scaling groups, but does Balaji will be able to create EC2, update EC2, delete EC2, load balancers, auto scaling group, if this is the only policy attached to the Balaji? No. Here read only permissions. Let's say similarly, here we have a EC2 full access. Here EC2 colon star. Now EC2 colon star. Action EC2 colon star, resources star means all all EC2 instances full permissions, all load balancers full permissions, CloudWatch full permissions, like that. It is like a, it is like a, for these full permissions like that, EC2 full access. Suppose if I am attaching this policy to some person, some user, or if I am attaching this policy to some group, so the user or the users which is part of the groups will get access to these resources, like that. Similarly, you have S3 full access. Here you can see S3 full access, S3 colon star. For all S3 buckets, you can give full permissions to the AWS users. Or you similarly VPC full access. You can see VPC create here you can see EC2 create VPC, create NAT gateway, create subnet, delete subnet. All these options are there. Similarly, you have RDS. Similarly, you have a ECR, container registry, read only access, ECR, read only access, ECR, full access, like that. So there are so many policies, AWS managed policy. If required, you can also create your own policy. Here also you can create your own policy, that is called as a customer managed policy. Here, if you already know how to create a policy, you can directly define in a JSON format. Here, create policy, go to JSON option, you can copy paste. Let's say I wanted to give full permissions to EC2, full permissions to EC2, but only one EC2, specific EC2, not all EC2 instances. Otherwise, I wanted to create a full permissions to S3, but not all S3 buckets, only specific S3 bucket. So here you can use your own policy also. Suppose I wanted to, here visual option also you can say, visual option also you can go, or JSON visual option you can select, specify what actions you wanted to perform. So I wanted to give permissions to EC2, I am selecting EC2, but not all permissions. If required all permissions also you can select all. Here, instead of resources star, instead of resources star, I can specifically mention I wanted to give full permissions to specific EC2 instance. I can add the EC2 instance ARN. Here I can give my server is in AP South 1A. We have that ARN. I mean to say every service will have an ID also, that resource ID. So here, let me go to EC2. Let me take servers also will have a ARN, so you can directly grab the ARN also, like this. Otherwise, if you know how to create ARN also, you can take. Let's say this is ARN. So here I can say I can give permissions only. If you know directly ARN, you can directly mention. Here you copy paste like this. So now, like this, click on next. What you are doing now, JSON editor I can use because there are so many characters. Fine. Let me go to JSON editor option. Here, anyhow, I have to give, right, permissions like this. All permissions. Only one statement. One statement here. I will say EC2 full permissions only to this resource. Like I am creating one policy here. I am creating one policy, like EC2 full permissions, but only this only this server, not for all the servers. Like this, you can create your own policy. Like you can say policy name EC2 full access only to that server. EC2 full access only to this server. You can give instance ID or tags also, like only to this server. Only to this server, like this. So easy to access to only this server, like that. You can create one policy. This is your own policy. Here you can filter also, guys. Here you can filter. Here you can see AWS managed, customer managed. Suppose if I filter with customer managed, whatever policy I have created, I can see I already created so many policies. You can see here I have created some policy to this one. In the previous sessions I have created like this. Similarly, I have created few more policies for all the EKS clusters. For all the EKS clusters, I wanted to give read-only permissions. For all EKS clusters, read-only permissions. EKS list describe, but here I have given resources star all EKS clusters. Like this, you can create your own policy. Suppose you wanted to give policy to EKS clusters, you can select EKS read-only permissions. Here you can select list read Then if you wanted to give read only permissions to all the EKS clusters, you can select all like this, click on next. Here you can say EKS read only, read only access. Like that you can create one policy. This is also your own policy. You can create via that editors also, like this is e case read only access, this one, like e case list describe for all e case clusters. Like this you can create all types. If you show, it will show AWS managed and customer managed. You can sort with this type also, like this. Otherwise you can apply filters here. So this is policies. Already if you see, we have so many policies. Let's say here you can see administrator policy, administrator, administrator access. So here you have something called administrator access. Let me show that. Here let me show that. Administrator access. Here you can see administrator access. Here it is like this. Here the policy is like this, guys. Effect star, action star, resources star. Here it is not like EC2 colon star, it is not like EC2 colon star, or it is not like EBS colon star, it is not like EKS colon star. So action star, resources star, effect allow, which means for all resources, for all the permissions, for all the permissions you are giving. Suppose if I am attaching this policy to Balaji, so Balaji becomes admin. Balaji become admin. Suppose if I attach this policy to Vishal, Vishal also becomes admin. Otherwise, if I create one group called admin group, suppose if I create one group called admin group, and if I add the users to this group, like I am adding Balaji and Vishal also to this group, and if I am attaching, this is group, admin group. I created one group called admin and I added these two to the users, and I have attached this policy. I have attached this policy to that group, administrator access policy. Now both becomes admins. Admin is different, root is different. But admins cannot close AWS account, admins cannot change root related credentials, like that. And if accidentally the root can make some guys as an admins, and accidentally if this admins revoked their permissions, again root can assign. So now let's do this. Now there is only one user called root user. I don't have any identity center to integrate. For now we are directly creating a users in the IAM, AWS. Otherwise, if we already integrated with the identity center, the users from identity centers also, it will be imported, right? You can directly attach policies to that users or groups. For now, let me create a user. I am creating one user called Balaji. Here it is asking provide access to the management console. Provide access to the management console. So management console means GUI. Whether you wanted to use grant UI access, GUI. AWS also can be managed via programmatic way and GUI. Programmatic access and console access. Programmatic means via CLI, via API, via SDK, via CLI, via API, via SDK. CLI, command line interface, API, application programming interface, SDK, software development kit. You can use Boto or Boto 3 with the Python code. You can create and manage AWS resources. Otherwise, you can use other developmental tools like Cloud Formation templates or Terraform programmatically. Or a console. Console means UI. Suppose you wanted to give you access to the console for this user, you have to select this. But again, what they are telling here, if you are providing console access to a person like Balaji, Bhaskar, like that, it is a always best practice to manage their access in identity center. You integrate with identity center and you give permissions. But I don't have identity center. That's why I am saying I want to create IAM user only. Let me generate some temporary password. I am generating like this with 8 characters at least, special characters I am using temporary password. Once this Balaji log into the AWS account for the first time, he has to change his password. Click on next. So here it is asking, whenever you are creating a user, it is asking whether you wanted to add that user to any group. But as of now, I don't have any groups, first of all. And whether you wanted to directly attach policies. It is, you can attach policies also directly. But for now, what I am doing, I will do. At any point of time after creating a user also, you can add the users to the group, or you can remove the users from the group, or you can attach policies directly to the users and remove also. For now, let me create a user. Create user. Now, as a normal user, sir, they have to log in. They have to remember account ID or account alias. As a normal user, if they has to log in, they have to remember the account ID or account alias. They are giving account alias means you can, instead of this number. So whenever you access, right, sometimes you may see like capgemini dot signin.aws.com, or maybe sometimes you may see like tcs dot. This is like alias, because it is not easy to remember this type of name. Number, this can be alias. You can create account alias also, that AWS admins will do. So if you don't know, the manager or a team lead will give you. So this is your AWS account URL. You use this URL and you log in with your credentials like that. So in real time, you can, if it is integrated with identity center and if you have a permissions, you can log in and access the resources. For now, let's keep a note of this URL somewhere. This is your account ID. So return to the users. So now I have a user, Balaji, but he is not added to any group and he don't have any permissions also. Let me click on this Balaji. He accept a password change policy. There is no permissions, and he is not added to any group also. Any group also. Now let me create a group. Let me create a group. I am creating two groups. One as a admin group. So while creating a group also, you can add the users to the group while creating, and you can attach policies also to that group. While creating a group, here you can add which users you wanted to add that group. You can do like this, what permissions you wanted to add. I am attaching admin permissions. Otherwise, even though you have not done this, later you can do. I am just directly creating a group. Now this group don't have any permissions attached, no users, so I have just a group. Similarly, let me create one more group. Maybe later normal user can do. Let me normal, this Balaji can do that one also. Now there is a group called admin. There is a user, but this user don't have any permissions. Now let me go to this group. I will add users here. I will add the users to this group. I will add the users to this group. So click on add user, select this. So I have added this Balaji to this group. Permissions I will attach. Add permissions, add attach policies, attaching this administrator access. Now there is a group called admin. As of now, one user. Like this, you can use add 100 users also. Now Balaji is an admin. Now Balaji can manage access to other people also. The way the admin policy is attached. Sometimes in the interview, they're asking one more question. The way we have administrator access, there is something called power user. Sometimes in the interview, if you are working on AWS and if they are looking for AWS architect or AWS admin role, they are going to ask what is the difference between admin user, what is the difference between admin user and power user in AWS. Admin user means the person who has attached with the admin policy, administrator access. What do you mean by power user? There is a one more policy called, let me go to policies. There is a one more policy called power user policy, power user. You can see power user access. So this power user is access also like admin only, but except IAM. So this power users will not have a permissions to IAM, except IAM all other permissions. Power users, if you see, allow but not IAM permissions, not IAM, not action IAM star organization account, except IAM permissions, all other permissions will be there. But administrators will have a all permissions including IAM also. Suppose if I am making some guy as a power user, he have access to all the resources but except IAM. The power users cannot create roles, power users cannot create or modify the users groups policies because they don't have access to IAM. Except IAM, all other permissions will be there. Sometimes in the interview they are asking, except IAM, all other permissions will be there for power users, admin, including IAM. Now I have created one user called Balaji and I have created one group called admin. In this group, Balaji is added and these permissions are attached. Now Balaji becomes admin. Let's imagine now I am Balaji. I am normal person. So I will go to my laptop, office laptop. I will try to open console.aws.com, but don't open in the same browser because you already logged in here. You already logged in here as a root user, but in real time you will not at all have access to the root user, right? Even though you try to type, you will not have root username password. It will ask you to give your credential, but in this browser I have already logged in as a root user. That's why it is showing like that. Maybe either you log out, either you log out as a root user and a login with that normal user Balaji credentials like that. Otherwise, what I will do, I will open another browser, or maybe same browser incognito window, maybe same browser incognito window, private window. So here, let's say I am Balaji. I wanted to access AWS. I joined some company, but here I I don't have the root credentials. I cannot click on this sign in using root credentials because I don't have a root username password. My manager or a architect did not share. So I have to log in as a normal user. So either you give account ID here or account alias. If you don't have, you have to contact with your team lead. Account ID or account alias is required for all users, whether it is identity center users or IAM users. Then you have to ask this. Otherwise, your manager will give. Otherwise, they will give one type of URL like this. Maybe account alias also or account ID also. If you know account ID, you can type ID or alias here. Then username Balaji, like that whatever temporary password, like this, click on sign in. Otherwise, if you open like this, the account ID will be pre-populated. Let's say, let me close this. Let me again open private window. In the URL itself, if it is there, it will pre-populate that. You no need to type. That account ID is pre-populated. Let me log in with my username Balaji, the temporary password. For the first time I am login, it will ask me to change the password. Old password I am giving, and this is my old password. I am giving some new password. Confirm new password. Match. Password is changed. Now I will continue to login, but I have a full permissions. Admin, right? Now I can do whatever I wanted to do. Let's say, let me go to EC2. Suppose I want to create a server, I can create. I want to stop the server, I can stop. Suppose I have a full permissions. Suppose I wanted to terminate some server. Let's say this server I wanted to terminate, delete. I can do that in this AWS account. Now let's say I wanted to see how many EKS clusters are there. I can go to EKS. So it is as of now I don't have any clusters. If required, I can create. I can see RDS, everything. S3 buckets if required. I don't have any RDS clusters also. RDS clusters also I don't have. If required, I can create databases. If required, I can create S3 buckets. I can upload objects because I am an admin, including IAM also. If required, I can create a normal user. Let's say now one more person, Harish, need access to this AWS. But in real time, Harish identity or a profile will not be created within AWS IAM. Harish profile will not be created within AWS, but in real time, that Harish profile or identity will exist in the organization LDAP. So since it is already integrated, that will be listed here, but we need to only attach the permissions. For now, I don't have identity center. Let's say now I am Balaji. I can create a users, I can create a policies, I can attach because I have an admin access including IAM norm like this. So let me create a one more user, Harish. For this guy also I wanted to give, but in real time we are going to have these person's credentials in LDAP. For this guy also I'm setting a temporary password, but as a admin, as a Balaji I am doing, not as a root. Understand, this is like a day-to-day activity. I don't want to add a Harish to this group. Let's create a user. Let's create user. Same. This user URL is same. This is your account ID. Now this guy don't have any groups. Don't have any policies. So as a admin Balaji, I am creating one more group like development group. And for this group, I am adding Harish. While creating group itself, you can do. And the policies also you can attach. Let's say I am giving EC to read only access only, and S3 read only access for now, and VPC read only for now, like only some read only permissions. Create the group. Now development group, Harish belongs to this group. These three permissions are attached to the group. Now Harish will try to log in. Let's imagine I am only Harish now. Let's imagine I am only Harish now. But in real time, Harish will use his username password, default username password, to my account, this AWS account. It is like a project level or account level. So let me show you. Let me show you. Now anyhow, again if I try to open in the this browser console.aws.com, I already logged in as a Balaji. It will directly take me to home page. What I will do, I will open another browser. Maybe in your system you may have a different browser. Maybe I am opening another browser. Let's imagine I am Harish now here. I will try to access my AWS account, the same AWS account with account ID or account alias in this. Now, Harish is the username, default password. For the first time he is login, he is also has to change. So, old password for the first time he is login. So, this is the temporary password. New password here. Okay, let's now Harish logged into this. But now you see, he will go to EC2 section. Already he can see so many permissions denied problem. Let's say in Mumbai region, let's go to instances. He has a permissions to see the servers. Now let's say he is trying to stop this server. Harish trying to stop the instance. What it is throwing error? You are not having a permissions to perform this. You don't have a permissions to terminate the instance. User don't have this permission, terminate instance permissions you don't have. Stopping also not there. Trying to stop, terminate, nothing will allow. Read only permissions. Let's say if he is trying to create a server also, it will not allow. He is trying to create server test. Select whatever AMI instance type, key pairs, everything he can select. Finally the moment he click on submit this launch instance, it will throw error. You don't have a permissions. Create security group permissions don't have. Create servers permissions you don't have, like that, because he don't have a permission. Similarly, let he this guy goes to EKS. Read only permissions for EKS also not there. Read only permissions to the EKS also not there. If you see, this user don't have a permissions to see how many clusters are there. Read only permissions also not there. Similarly for RDS, read only permissions for RDS also not there. And similarly, if you go to any other service like ECR, Elastic Container Registry, this guy don't have a permissions to ECR also. Let's go to this repositories. Here it is saying you don't have this ECR describe permissions, like that. You can't create a repositories, ECR repositories. You don't have a permissions, like this. So only has EC2 read only, VPC read only, S3 read only. S3 also he can just see the buckets and objects and download objects, but he cannot create a bucket. He cannot create a bucket like this because he don't have a permission. But let me show you other person, Balaji. Balaji is admin, right? Suppose if this guy really requires a permissions, he has to work with whom? Harish really requires permissions. Typically how it works in real time any project, he has to raise a ticket using some ticketing tool. Using some ticketing tool like a Jira or any other ticketing tool, project management tool, he has to raise a ticket saying that this is a Harish, I need a permissions. Okay, so service now we are not going to use for this type of project management. Service now we are going to use for release management. Suppose you wanted to release your applications or futures, you wanted to track your release management service now will be used. But this Jira is used for task management like project management. So this Jira you can use raising a ticket most of the time. Service now also you can use, but most of the people service now they are using for project management. I mean to say release management. Here this is like a Jira. They can raise a ticket, and that ticket will be assigned to admins, and again it will go for a approval also. So there will be a flow. So once Harish raise the ticket will go to approval to the manager. Manager has to approve. Manager has to approve. Then only the other person can proceed. So manager will ask a reason also. Why do you need admin permissions to this S3? Can you tell me? So you can say I am working on so and so project. I am working my role is I wanted to upload some files to S3 bucket. I wanted to do something, so I need a permission. Then once manager approves, then the admin can assign the policies, or he can add you to the group where already there is a policies attached. Let's imagine now this Harish requires permissions to the EKS. As of now he don't have. Now let's say Balaji. Balaji, let's say Balaji, admin Balaji, he can go to IAM because he has a permissions. He can attach policies, that e-case policy. Already we have created like that. You can attach. Let's say RDS policy is also required permission. As a Balaji admin, what he can do, he can create a policy. So for which service, suppose he wanted to give permissions to RDS, again read only permissions, list permissions, read permissions, select. For all the RDS clusters, if you have to give, select like this, click on next. This is customer managed RDS, read only access. Like this, create a policy. If it is not there, if it is already there, no need to create. So this policy he can attach to that group directly. So like Harish, if there are so many people, everyone will also get access. Attach policy, customer managed. Here I have created this RDS, read only access, attach. Already we created e-case also, e-case read only, e-case read only, e-case read only access also we have created, attach. Now let's switch to the other browser. Now I am Harish. Let me go to now that e-case or RDS. Now let me go to this one. Now it is not throwing any error. You can see Harish, it is not throwing any error, but I don't have any RDS cluster. If I have to create a database clusters with whatever, like you can select everything, but finally when you click on submit, I'm giving some root username for database. This is database RDS cluster. Okay, you cannot have special characters here. This is RDS. Database will be created and managed by, you no need to create a databases. So primary DB, secondary DB with MySQL, it will set up. So I am selecting all these options, and finally the moment I click on create, here itself you can see you don't have a permissions like that, but read only permissions are there. But create permissions, update permissions not there for RDS. Similarly, EKS. This is how you can use IAM. Now it is not showing any error, but I don't have a cluster. But if I have to create EKS cluster like this, it will throw error. You don't have a permissions. Like that. This is how you can use IAM. Understand, guys, what is users, what is groups, what is policies in IAM? Everyone clear? Whatever has been explained. Now there is something called a role. IAM role. Give me 1 minute, guys. 1 minute. Sorry, guys. I'll continue. So there is something called role. So when we will use that role? Role is something like, suppose it is not a human. Suppose you have to grant permissions to the AWS resources for persons like Balaji, Harish, Vishal, like a developers, DevOps guys. Then you can use these users and policies and groups. Let's say, suppose you wanted to grant access to the AWS services itself. Let's say you are using EC2, That EC2 requires internally S3 permission. Programmatically via CLI or API, that you are deploying some application in EC2, but that application is internally trying to contact S3 for uploading, downloading something. So AWS services requires access to the AWS services. Then you can create a role, you can attach the policies to the role, and you can attach those roles to the AWS resource. So here there is something called role. There is something called role. So what that role, how it works? IAM role. Suppose you are having a role. How it works, let me tell you. Sorry guys, so here we have something called roles. IAM role. So you can create IAM role, you can create IAM role also, and you can attach policies to this role. You can attach the policies or permissions to this role. So you can attach any policies or permissions to this role. That can be admin policy, read only policies, like that you can attach. Now within AWS, your AWS services requires permissions. Then here you can use this role concept. Let's say you have EC2, and via this EC2 you are performing something. Let's say here via Terraform you are trying to create a resources. Without permissions, this EC2 also will not able to do anything, right? Suppose there is a S3 bucket. This EC2 instance has to upload some files, download some files to this S3 via CLI or API, like that. In this case, you can attach policies like S3 full access to this role. You can create a role, attach the policies to this role. This role you attach to the AWS resources like EC2. Then this EC2 will get access to other AWS resources based on the policies attached. This is how roles can be used. This is how roles can be used. Suppose you are creating EKS cluster. EKS cluster internally requires access to other AWS resources like ELB, EC2. Then you create a IAM role, attach the required policies to that role, and attach that role with other AWS services. You guys already used this role concept in Ansible dynamic inventory. So in you created one EC2 instance and you have installed Ansible there, and via Ansible you wanted to do some kind of installations or configuration, but you wanted to get the inventory details, EC2 details dynamically. So what you guys have done, you have used some kind of a plugin, dynamic inventory plugin, but you created one IAM role with the required permissions. You attached that IAM role to the Ansible EC2 instance. Then only it was able to get the server details. Like this, you can use role also. Understand? IAM role also. For persons, you can use users. That can be IAM user or identity center user. Now, let me tell you something about CLI. Let me tell you something about CLI. So you can manage AWS resources via CLI also. You can manage AWS resources via CLI also. You can manage AWS resources via CLI, AWS CLI. So here CLI, command line interface. But for small activities, you can use CLI because you have to execute so many commands for complex operation. Suppose if required, you can create a VPC, you can create a subnets, route tables, NAT gateways, load balancers, anything you can do via CLI. But it is like you have to execute so many commands one after the other. It is like a procedural. It is like a procedural approach. One command has, like a dependent services has to be created first, the next only you can create other services. You have to execute your commands in a proper order, sequential, procedural, programmatic, like that. But for small activities you can use AWS CLI. But for complex infrastructure management, we have different tools, like infrastructure as a code tools, like you can use Terraform, or you can use cloud formation templates. Infrastructure as a code, whatever infrastructure resources you have to create in real time, we are not going to manually create any infrastructure like VPC, subnets, route tables via console, because it's a time consuming and error prone also. Manually you may do some mistakes, you may miss to define some routes, you may miss to create some resources. So infrastructure also we are going to create as a code. You may use cloud formation templates or Terraform, like that. But you can use CLI. But for CLI, you have to execute so many commands one after the other. It's a procedural approach, and it is not recommended. For small task you can use CLI, like you wanted to upload some file to S3, or you wanted to download some file from S3, or you wanted to stop the server, you wanted to start the server, or you wanted to get some IP address of a server. Like small things you can do CLI, but everything also you can do, but it is not recommended. So programmatic access as a users also, suppose I am a Balaji in my local laptop or desktop. Let's say I am a AWS user, AWS admin. So here, let's say in my laptop also I can install AWS CLI. I can install AWS CLI. Using this AWS CLI, I can manage AWS resources. But here also authentication will be done. And if I have a permissions, then only AWS will allow. But here, programmatic access as a users, as a persons, if you are doing, you have to use access key and secret key. Suppose AWS server, this AWS EC2 instances also, here also you can install AWS CLI or Terraform. You can install AWS CLI or Terraform. You can use AWS APIs, Boto, that also you can run via Terraform. You can use Boto 3 also. You can use APIs also. You can develop your own Python code, and you can use AWS APIs to create, manage everything programmatic. Here, if it is via AWS resources, programmatically, some applications or a programs requires access to the AWS. You are going to create a IAM role and attach the role with required policies. But the persons requires, like a users requires, like persons, like developer, DevOps guy, end users will not. End users will just access the applications deployed. End users will just access the applications deployed in that AWS. But for end users, you are not going to give any access to the servers, storages, like that. They will just access the applications deployed in that AWS via domain name, load balancers. But here, internal users like developers, DevOps guys also, for these guys, if you want to give programmatic access, they have to use access key and secret key, not username and password. They can generate an access key and secret key and they can use. But in case of AWS services requires programmatic access, you can create IAM role and attach IAM role with required policies via CLI, via Terraform, Boto, APIs also they can manage. Suppose persons like me, programmatic access, access key and secret key, console access, username and password. Understand the whole concept of how we can create, manage AWS resources via console programmatic. Before I show that how to install AWS CLI, how to configure AWS CLI with some simple commands. This is very, very important. Even though this is a DevOps course, even though it's a DevOps training, it is not AWS administrator course or AWS associate architect course. Whatever services I wanted to explain, I am explaining in and out of, so that you can do anything in that services like that. So that much extent I am discussing, but the only thing, you have to attend the classes regularly, you have to practice everything, listen everything, practice everything, so that you can understand how things work in any real application or a project. Now, even in my local laptop also I can install AWS CLI. Let's say I am using macbook. Let's say I am using macbook. Install AWS CLI. You can install AWS CLI in MacBook, Windows, everywhere. Linux servers or MacBook also you can install. So here, don't install first. Here, let's go to this AWS CLI installation. Here, you can install AWS CLI. You can install AWS CLI. Installing AWS CLI on Linux, you can install MacBook, you can install Windows, you can install. Suppose you guys are using Windows laptops or a desktop, in your local laptop, you can click on this download and run AWS CLI MSI installer. If you click on this link, one file will be downloaded. Microsoft installer file will be downloaded. Go to that downloads folder, double click on this, click on next. It will install in Windows, and AWS CLI will be installed. Click on next, finish. And I am using MacBook, I can install pkg file, package file. So here, AWS CLI package. So I can download this type of software for my local laptop MacBook. I can double click on this, so it will install AWS CLI in my MacBook. Click on continue, 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 agree. Just follow this next, continue, install. It is asking my local laptop password. I am giving my password. Let's install. Now we have installed AWS CLI. But understand, if you just install AWS CLI, which doesn't mean you will get access. You have to configure AWS CLI. Let me show that. Let me go to my terminal, that command prompt. In case of Windows, you will have a command prompt, but here I have a terminal, right? In your Windows, you have a command prompt. This is my local. So here we have installed AWS CLI. You can execute AWS -hyphen version command. It will show you. I have installed just now. You can also install in Windows. But if you just install AWS CLI, which doesn't mean you have a permissions, you have to configure. We have this version of the AWS CLI installed, but which doesn't mean you have a permissions to interact with AWS. So commands you no need to by heart, guys. Commands you no need to by heart anything. So don't by heart any commands. So you have a documentation, official website for AWS CLI reference. AWS CLI reference. AWS CLI reference will be there. So there is a documentation, AWS CLI, command and reference. So here you can see, you can see like commands and sub commands. Like this is how the commands will work. AWS command and for which service you wanted to manage via command, and what you wanted to do, action and options. It will be like this. Suppose here AWS S3, I wanted to manage a service S3. What action? Suppose you wanted to create a bucket. There is something called MB, make bucket, and your bucket name you can give something like this. Instead of a man via console you are creating a S3 bucket, if required you can do like this. AWS service is S3. This what you wanted to do, make bucket, like a create bucket. The options, suppose you wanted to see how many EKS clusters are there. AWS EKS list clusters, how many clusters you have, you wanted to see like this. Suppose you wanted to stop some server, AWS EC2 terminate instance is there, terminate this. Suppose you wanted to delete, terminate instance, your instance your instance id, hyphen instance id, you can give instance ids, you can give that instance id. But you no need to by heart. Here there is a option. AWS is the main command. AWS options, command, subcommand, parameters. So this options is whether you wanted to do S3 management or EC2 management or EKS management, what command or action, subcommand and parameters. So here they are giving, you can use all these options. You can use AWS CLI with all these available services. Suppose you wanted to do something with let's say EC2, that you can do. Suppose something you wanted to do with the EKS, EFS, ECS, ECR, ELB. So this is like a available services. Suppose you wanted to do something with EKS, again click on this one. They are going to show you again what available commands. Suppose you wanted to create cluster, AWS EKS create cluster with options again. If you click here, what options you can use when you are creating a cluster, like a cluster name, role, ARN. Similarly for S3 also you have. Let's say if you scroll down, AWS S3, you can manage S3 also via CLI S3. Here subcommands, AWS S3, what commands you can use, like ls list, S3 list buckets, copy files from bucket to system to the bucket, MB make bucket. With examples also they are giving. Suppose I wanted to see how many buckets are there, I can execute AWS S3 ls. I wanted to create a bucket, I can do. But here we just installed, but we have not configured any permissions. Now, if I execute AWS S3ls, what it is trying to say, let me show you. You unable to locate credentials, you have to configure. But this is not AWS system. This is my local laptop. I am a normal user. Here you can configure your access keys and secret keys, your own access keys and secret keys. So let me log into AWS as a Balaji. As a Balaji, I logged into my AWS account, Balaji. Here, go to the security credentials. Here, go to the security credentials. Let's scroll down. Here, you can see access keys. So, access keys to send a programmatic calls to AWS from CLI or SDK APIs like that. Let's create an access key. For what use case? You can select any use case listed here. You can select other use cases also like that. Create access key. This is your access key, this is your secret key. You can, this is your secret key, this is your access key. For future reference we can download. I am downloading to my local laptop. Now you can configure. I can configure AWS configure command, access key I am giving, sorry, Something copied here. Let me press Ctrl C. I will do it again. AWS configure. This is my access key. Let me copy properly. Here, you can click here to copy. Copy access key first. Paste here. Then this is secret key. You can click here also for copying. Even though it is hidden like this, you can click here. Copy, then paste properly. Default region. So you can say to which region AWS CLI has to interact to manage the services. I am giving AP South 1, Mumbai region. Output format, this AWS CLI will give output in table JSON like that. I am giving JSON format. Now we configured. You can see AWS STS get caller identity. You can use one command to see as a which user or with which role you are calling also. STS get caller identity. So you can see I configured AWS CLI as Balaji user. Now Balaji has a admin permissions. So S3 permissions also there. AWS S3 LS. As of now, we don't have any buckets. If I go to S3 also here, if I go to S3 also here, you see we don't have any bucket. We don't have any buckets. If required, I can create a bucket in that account also like this AWS S3 MB S3 colon. This is there in the documentation like this. If you go to this AWS CLI documentation, AWS S3 MB make bucket. So here they are giving how to create a bucket with example also like S3 colon your bucket name. So I am giving some bucket name like test AWS CLI bucket 1 2 3 4 5. The region I can mention in which region, but even though I don't mention, I configured the region default region as a AP South 1 in Mumbai region it will create. Now if I go to AWS S3 LS, you can see there is one bucket. If here also let me refresh. Here also let me refresh the page. You can go to buckets. You can see one bucket now, but within this bucket we don't have any objects. If required, I can upload via CLI. I have some file in my local laptop. Let's say I wanted to upload this file in my local laptop. So AWS S3 CP copy source is this file which is there in my system, and destination is S3 colon this bucket, and I have a permissions, right, full permissions. So I can copy also, I can upload. Now if I go and see here, with you can see that object is uploaded via CLI. Suppose if you want, you can download also. Let's say you uploaded some file programmatically another, or maybe via GUI. Let's say one more file you have uploaded via GUI or maybe different way. Let's say you have uploaded this file, let's say programmatically or maybe other way you have uploaded this, I wanted to download, right? Here same command but reverse. Now what objects are there in the bucket also you can see AWS S3 LS. It will list buckets. Within the bucket what you have, you wanted to see same command but you give the bucket name like this. Now within this bucket we have two objects. This I wanted to download. Same command AWS S3 CP, but the source is now S3. Destination is your current system. You have a permissions also for uploading, downloading as admin access that covers S3 full also. Let's say source is now this one, and I can give where I wanted to download. If I don't give complete path, it will download to the present folder in my system. Now you can see downloaded. Now that AWS file, this downloaded from S3. Like this, you can use AWS CLI. Suppose you wanted to see how many clusters are there, list clusters. But as of now, I don't have any clusters. Let's say AWS EC2 describe instances. You can see how many instances are there also. Describe instances. It will give in a JSON format. You can see there are so many servers. This is like server details it is giving. So this is your instance ID. This is your instance id that is created in that subnet with this tags you have. Like there are so many servers, it will giving in a JSON format. If you want to filter also, you can filter. There is a detailed documentation here. Let's go back to AWS. Let's say you wanted to manage EC2. Go to EC2. Here, describe instances. You can see there is option called describe instances. Describe instances. Describe instances. So you can see like details, like describe instances. There are some options. You can filter. You can filter based on the instance type also. You can filter based on, you can apply some kind of a filters based on the instance type. Hyphen filters. I wanted to see m5 dot large machines, or you don't want to see more details. You can see only instance id, subnet ids also. You can do like this. You wanted to see only instance id, subnet id. You don't want, you can apply some queries filtration. Like let me press q. So here it is going to give how many instances are there and in which subnet that instance is there, like that. Instance id, subnet id is like that. It is giving instance id, subnet id. Suppose if you wanted to terminate some instances, you can do that. Let's say because I have a permission, I am admin. Let me go to EC2. If you don't have a permissions, it will not allow unless until admin give permissions to you. You can't do. Let's say I wanted to terminate this server. You can take this instance id, this instance id. There is an option let me press q here to come out. AWS EC2, instead of describe instance, there is something called terminate instance hyphen instance ids, like this instance id. Now I have a terminate instances. Terminate instances, I have to use terminate instances, that instance id. If you don't know arguments also, you can see like this. Help AWS EC2 terminate instances hyphen help command you can use, or you can refer the documentation also. Hyphen help command or just help. Here you can see what option. Hyphen instance ids I have to give. So I have to give hyphen instance ids. There is typo mistakes. Okay, now I am giving this instance id. So Balaji has a permissions, it is terminating now. That instance is getting terminated. Earlier it was a stopped. Now let me refresh. Now it is terminated. If you do like this also, but you should have a permission. Let's say as a Harish user, if I configure this access keys and secret key, is Harish will be able to create buckets, upload files, delete servers? No, because he don't have a permissions. Read only permissions are there, but not full permissions. Let's say Harish. This is Harish logged in to the AWS console. This is Harish, but Harish don't have a permissions to generate access keys and secret keys also, guys. Suppose Harish logged in here. If he goes to this security credentials, he don't have permissions to generate access keys and secret keys also. For that one, admin has to give permissions to generate access keys and secret keys also. Now Balaji can give permissions to that Harish to generate access keys and secret keys for himself. So you have to create some policy. Generate access keys permissions AWS. So we have to create some permission, some policy for generating access keys and secret keys for them also. permissions required to manage access keys. So these permissions is required: create access key, delete access key, get access key for themselves. You create as an admin, you create this policy as an admin, Balaji, attach that policy to that other people, so that they can generate access keys and secret keys for themselves, so that they can use that access keys and secret keys for programmatic access. But again, based on the permissions, they have, then only they can do, otherwise they will not able to do. This is a manage access keys policy. This policy is created. This policy we will attach to that normal groups, so that the people in that group will have permissions to generate their own access keys also. Manage access keys. So now Harish, let me go to Harish tab. Now Harish can generate access keys and secret keys for himself. Now if he scroll down, he can see this option. So Harish is generating access keys and secret keys for himself. You can download for future reference also. Now let me reconfigure. Let's imagine I am Harish. I am reconfiguring my AWS CLI. Again, I am overriding. Now I am giving Harish access key, Harish a secret key. Press enter for same region. Press enter without giving anything. Now I have configured AWS CLI with Harish credentials. But Harish don't have a permissions to create buckets. Suppose Harish is trying to say AWS S3 MB S3 colon test 1 2 3 4 5. What it is saying? You don't have a permissions to create buckets, but you have a permissions to see the buckets. Read only permission. And within this bucket, how many objects also he has? He can see, and he can download. Read only permissions. Download AWS S3 CP. He can download files from S3 to local. Let's say this object he can download. Read only permissions are there. Downloaded, but upload no permissions. Let's say he is trying to upload, let's say this file, AWS S3 CP. This file he wanted to upload to this S3 bucket. Now Harish has read only permissions. So it is saying you don't have a permissions to put object. Put object means upload. And he cannot delete bucket. AWS S3 RB, remove bucket. Remove bucket also don't have permissions. Remove bucket don't have a permissions, like that. Whether programmatically or manually also, if we go to, let's Harish go to the S3 bucket via console also he cannot delete, via CLI or programmatic also he cannot delete, unless until permissions are given. Suppose really Harish required permissions, Balaji, that admin can assign the permissions. This is how you can use CLI also, guys. Understand? AWS CLI also. Concept is important. Commands you no need to by heart, because there are thousands of commands. Thousands of commands are there. You no need to by heart any command. The concept is important. Permissions, how we can give, so that they can manage. Now, let's say AWS services requires permission. Let me go back to Balaji. Let's say this server requires permissions. Some AWS servers require permissions, like Terraform you are installing, via Terraform you are creating, or maybe via CloudFormation you are creating, or maybe your EC2 instance. Let's say this is your Jenkins server. Let's imagine this is your Jenkins server. Balaji has a full permissions to EC2. Let's say this is your Jenkins server. Jenkins requires permissions to S3, because you are uploading some artifacts to S3, downloading. You can use AWS CLI commands in pipelines. You can execute Terraform commands in pipelines. But without permissions, if you are interacting with AWS programmatically via CLI or APIs you are interacting, and that programs or applications are already deployed in your AWS resources only. Without permissions, they cannot do anything. In that case, you can attach the roles, required policies, then you can interact. Let me show. Let me connect to this server. Here also you can install AWS CLI, Terraform, like that also. The most important point you have to remember, you have to follow the least privilege principles. You have to follow the least privilege principles. You have to follow the least privilege principles, guys. You have to follow the least privilege principles here. Least privilege principles, what does it mean? Least privileges means you should attach only whatever permissions that is really required. Don't give unnecessary permissions. Don't give unnecessary permissions or unnecessary things which is not at all required. If you are giving elevated access, if you are giving elevated access, definitely it is going to cause the problems. If you are giving elevated permissions, elevated access, definitely it is going to cause the problems. More power comes with more responsibilities. You may misuse. Accidentally you are running some program or running some command, it may delete the critical resources like your RDS clusters, EKS clusters. It is going to impact. So whether it's a person, whether it's a system or application, really whatever permissions you wanted to give, only give that. Least privileges, based on the requirements, again you can keep on adding more permissions. Don't directly give full permissions. That is very very important. Anywhere, wherever you are using. So here, let's say you have installed AWS CLI, but as of now we don't have. Let's download and install AWS CLI. It's a Linux system. It's a Linux system. It's a Linux system. So you can install AWS CLI in Linux also via package managers or via downloading zip file extract like this. Let's say we download this here, unzip. But if you don't have unzip, you can install unzip. So sudo yum install unzip. Now let's extract this and install. Now we have a AWS CLI. This is my already AWS EC2 instance. But if you just install AWS CLI, let's say AWS S3 LS, it is saying you don't have configured AWS STS get caller identity. We have not configured this with any role. Here it is not a user, right? This is already a system, AWS systems, AWS services. So you should not use user credentials, user access keys and secret keys in order to grant permissions to the AWS resources. To get access to other AWS resources, you can create a role and you can attach that role. You can attach that IAM role and you can manage access to that IAM role, right? So here, as an admin, I am Balaji, I have an admin permissions, right? So what I can do, I can go to IAM, I can create a required roles, go to the roles, create role, and here you have to select appropriate options for which AWS service you wanted to attach the role. For which AWS service I wanted to attach the role. For which service you want to attach, not like for which service you want to give permission. So here, allow an AWS service like EC2, Lambda or any other to perform actions in this account. So I want to attach this role to EC2. Attaching to EC2, click on next. But what permissions? If required, you can give administrator access, but accidentally someone has SSH access to that server. Accidentally, if they execute some commands, it may delete your critical resources like RDS, EKS, like that, accidentally or intentionally or unintentionally. So the best practice is give whatever permissions which is really required. Based on the requirements in the future, you can attach policies, you can remove policies also. That can be for persons or that can be for roles also. For now, okay, I'm giving admin access, but it is not recommended. Best practices, least privilege principles. This is security. So I'm giving role name as admin role. Role name as admin role. Admin role. You can already it is there. Let me give administrator. Administrator role something. Name should be unique. Now this role I can attach to that server. Go to that server EC2. Go to that server EC2. This server. Via pipelines, instead of manually executing via pipelines also you can execute AWS CLI commands. Suppose you have installed Terraform, you have written the Terraform scripts to create a resources, so you can attach required permissions to that server and you can execute Terraform scripts from that server, then only it will able to create. So here let me go to that server, actions, security, modify IAM role. So let me attach this IAM role, administrator role, to that server. Now this server is attached with that role. If I execute AWS STS get caller identity, you can see this. Now here you can see this here, right? So now let's say AWS S3LS. He can see buckets, AWS S3LS, AWS EKS, RDS, everything is there. Admin, list clusters. If you wanted to manage the clusters via CLI also you can do. Now S3LS in this bucket, how many objects also there? Now if required you can remove AWS S3 RM, remove RB, remove bucket. But with the objects in the bucket we can't remove bucket. RM, we can remove the objects like this. This object removed now, this object also removed. If required you can remove another object also like this. And we don't have any objects in the bucket, he has a permissions to delete also. Without mounting we can upload and download files to S3 also. Let's say this EC2 instance, without mounting this object storage you can upload and download. Suppose this file you wanted to upload, we don't have anything as of now. Let's say AWS S3 CP, this object, this bucket. Now we are copying. So without mounting, programmatically also you can upload and download. Now it is there. If you wanted to download again you can download. Reverse, source is S3 bucket, destination is your local system where you wanted to download. If you wanted to remove, you can remove also the objects in the bucket. Let's say this is there in the bucket, you can remove. Finally, if required you can remove the bucket because we have a permissions. This role has a permissions to delete everything also. So this is how you can use roles also, guys. Okay. Thank you. So here in today's session, we discussed the in and out of AWS security, how you can secure your AWS services using IAM, how you can grant access to the persons, and how you can grant access to the applications or systems also we discussed. So we discussed in and out of authentication, authorization, right? authentication, authorization, what is authentication, what is authorization, and integrating AWS with identity centers also. But I don't have any identity center. That's why I was not able to demonstrate, but the concept I have explained. And within AWS also, you can create a users and you can attach policies. Even though you have a users in identity centers, those identity center users also you can attach policies in AWS so that they will get access to the AWS. And again, you can create a groups, you can add the users to the group, you can add the policies to the group, you can add and remove the users from that group, so that based on the permissions added to the group, the users in that group will get access. Otherwise, you can individually also manage access to the users, but that is tedious task. And we discussed about policy, AWS managed policy, customer managed policy, and also we discussed about roles. We discussed about CLI again. So if you understand all this concept, you can do whatever you wanted to do for any applications or projects. Hope you enjoyed learning IAM today, right? Because we discussed in and out of AWS IAM.